Chairman. We now go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very useful hearing, and I appreciate the testimony of each of these witnesses. You know, I believe that AI is going to upend a lot of careers, and in fact, the House of Representatives has had 3 bipartisan Congress-wide briefings on AI in the last 2 weeks. It's going to upend the practice of law. It's going to upend the practice of medicine. It'll probably upend engineering. The difference for creators, at least you have some protection in the law, which is copyright, which is absent other professions. And the question is, how will that work to protect creators? I was glad that Mr. Altman in his testimony indicated that creators should be compensated and do have rights in that recognition. But you know, the technology is complicated, and how that is going to work, we don't know yet. I'll disclose that a number of months ago, I put together some creators with the AI people to see if we couldn't have discussions. And I was thinking honestly about the Music Modernization Act, which I think was very successful in reaching negotiations so that creators could be compensated. And I'll express some disappointment that progress that I expected to have been made by now has not yet been made. So I'm hoping that those discussions will re-energize. But here's a question, I guess, for Mr. Birch, Professor Birch, and maybe Mr. Sedlick, since you represent different ends of the knowledge base here. We've got basically 2 questions. You got the input question, which is basically lines of code that have been assembled. And then you've got the output question, which is how much of this is infringing. Is it, in your judgment, even possible to reach an agreement like the Music Modernization Act did so that creators can be fairly compensated?
I think that there are a number of practical issues that make this very difficult to imagine, not least of which is the fact that we're not performing anything when we're outputting something from a system. It's not simply a collage where we're combining elements of existing work. It's genuinely been distilled into a form that's completely different than the original. That, I think, is going to be the crux of what makes this difficult. I think that there might be a market for licensing images and songs and things like that that companies end up voluntarily entering into. But I don't think that the practical implementation of such a thing will be as easy as it was for the MMA, which I understand was already very complex.
I don't think that most photographers are concerned or whining about the fact that AI is going to affect, it's going to compete with them in terms of it's easier to create images with AI than it is to create a photograph. It is. What they're concerned with is the use of their works in that system, grinding it up and spitting it out as generated AI based on their works and the fact that they're not compensated and it's done without their authorization. Images are data, but they're not merely unprotected facts. An image, my image, is my depiction of a fact, applying my creative expression to depict it. And so the copying of that under 106, irrespective of anything else, is an infringement. It's copied into a system. That's infringement right there. In terms of the output, that output may or may not resemble my work. It may or may not infringe on my work. But the input, copying the work under 106, would be an infringement unless, fact specifically, it's fair use.
I thank you for that. As I was listening, I was thinking back to my prior service as a staffer to my predecessor in office, Congressman Don Edwards, and his partnership with Bob Kastemeyer in the 1976 Act, and how the work that they produced has endured to this day to protect the creative forces. But obviously we need to meld technology to help that protection. Adobe, which is located in my district, actually did the watermarking of their tagging, we actually used that in the January 6th committee to prevent our material from being altered. So I think there's some real possibilities here. I think we've got a long road ahead, but I'm hoping that the discussions that are ongoing can ramp up a little bit, because I think that's probably the most productive way to reach a successful conclusion. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Texas.